Good morning. Good to have you with us. May the 4th be with you on this Star Wars Day. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thank you very much for starting your week with us. We're going to begin the escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran. This morning, Iran's military is claiming it has prevented a U.S. Navy destroyer from entering the Strait of Hormuz. That is according to multiple outlets. It comes after an announcement from the White House that the U.S. would begin guiding ships through the passageway today. President Trump is calling the mission Project Freedom.
In a post on Truth Social, President Trump said the move was intended to help neutral and innocent bystanders of the U.S. war with Iran. He added, quote, "We will guide their ships safely out of these restricted waterways so that they can freely and ably get on with their business." The British military says at least 2 ships were struck near the strait yesterday. Comes as negotiations between Washington and Tehran are once again up in the air. President Trump said he was reviewing a new offer from Iran to end the war, though he initially cast doubt on the latest 14-point peace proposal. Yesterday, Mr. Trump said that, quote, "very positive discussions were taking place." Global oil prices dropped 2% after that announcement before ticking back up toward $110 a barrel this morning. For the latest, let's bring in NBC News political reporter Megan Leibowitz. Megan, good morning. A lot happening this morning. What more do we know about sort of the escalating situation between the U.S. and Iran in the Strait of Hormuz?
Hey, Joe and Savannah, good morning. Yeah, so the president's latest announcement yesterday, he said that this came after countries had asked the U.S. to help free up their ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there are many outstanding questions here, including we don't know exactly which countries had asked the president and the U.S. reportedly, according to the president, to help free up those ships in the strait. Now, the president had characterized these countries as neutral and innocent bystanders and said that these ships are from countries that don't have anything to do with the war in Iran. Now, he also characterized this as a humanitarian gesture in that post to Truth Social, where you can see on your screen as well, he said, if in any way this humanitarian process is interfered with, that interference will unfortunately have to be dealt with forcefully. Now, as you mentioned earlier, this is far from a done deal, and we're starting to hear perhaps how Iran seems to be responding from this. We heard this morning, just very recently, from a semi-official Iranian media that has said that Iran's army says that it has prevented U.S. naval destroyers from entering the Strait of Hormuz. So a lot of outstanding questions here. Is that in fact true, what the semi-official state media is reporting? And if it is, how does the U.S. ultimately respond to that, especially considering how the president had characterized this in that post to Truth Social, saying that he would respond if in fact this was blocked in some way?
Megan, this past Friday marks 60 days since President Trump had officially notified Congress of the start of the war. And there's just been this back and forth here with the president. Let's talk about where it's at now. Under the War Powers Act, that deadline meant President Trump was supposed to seek authorization from lawmakers in order to keep the war going. But he sent this letter to Congress referencing this ceasefire that began about a month ago. Part of what it says is the ceasefire has since been extended. There's been no exchange of fire between the United States forces and Iran since April 7th. The hostilities that began on February 28th have terminated. Where does the showdown between the president and Congress stand now, and what can we glean from that letter?
Yeah, so in that letter, he basically laid out the case for why he thinks that he does not have to go to Congress to get congressional authorization now that the war has hit that 60-day threshold. So pointing in that letter, as you saw, to the ceasefire that's ongoing and arguing that hostilities have been terminated. Now, 60 days is really a very important milestone to be marking in this conflict. That's because the 1973 War Powers Act had said that when there's ongoing military conflicts, when it gets to that 60-day threshold, that's when the president has to go to Congress to get congressional authorization in order for that to continue. So we also heard over the weekend from Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who echoed the president's remarks that he made in that letter to Congress. Take a listen to what he had to say on Meet the Press.
Is the United States at war with Iran?
No. I mean, what President Trump said this weekend is absolutely true. As we said to Congress last week, there has been nothing going on, no hostilities, no exchange of fire since in almost a month.
Do you think the administration is following the law?
No, absolutely not. The Navy is still deployed. It is still blockading Iranian ports. It is still interdicting ships There's no exception for the U.S. Navy to the War Powers Act. So what Mr. Blanche said is absolutely wrong.
So as you heard there from Senator Adam Schiff, a Democrat from California, Democrats really aren't buying this. They're pushing back, arguing that the president still has to go to Congress to get congressional authorization now that the war has hit that 60-day threshold. And some of these lawmakers as well are pointing to the fact that there has been this ongoing naval blockade by the enforcement of which from both the U.S. and Iran. And, you know, in particular, as we get to the developments of this morning with Iran saying that it's preventing the U.S. naval destroyer from coming into the Strait of Hormuz, we're likely to get more reaction from lawmakers as the situation continues developing. But Democrats certainly pushing back against the president and saying that the president really does still need to go to Congress to get that authorization, Joe and Savannah.
And Megan, while we're talking about politics, we're now 2 months into this unpopular war. The Pentagon says it's cost $25 billion so far. Gas prices now at a 4-year high. The national average sitting $4.45 a gallon, and we know the president's job approval rating is down. Real quick, is he making any progress trying to change public perception as the midterms get closer?
So we got a little bit more insight into how the public is viewing both the war and then also President Trump's larger performance in office. This was from a poll by ABC News, Washington Post, and Ipsos that found that 62% of people disapproved of the president's job approval. Now, you know, notably, that disapproval rating is a record high for that poll over both of the president's terms. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly as well, this broke down a little bit along party lines, with about 85% of Republicans approving of the president's job performance. But among independents, that number is down as well. Now just 25% of independents approve of the president's job performance, according to that poll. We also got a little bit more of an indication about where the public stands on a couple of specific issues laid out that the president has been championing and pushing for during his time in office. I want to point you to a couple of those. Now, one of them was cost of living. Now, 76% of voters disapproved of how the president handles cost of living. 23% approved as well. When it comes to inflation, 72% disapproved too. Now, cost of living and inflation are typically really important areas that voters tend to focus on when we get to midterm elections as well. Now, across all of the different areas that this poll measured, the president was underwater in all of them. But the area that he performed the best in, the category that he performed the best in, was how people view how he's handling the immigration situation and the U.S.-Mexico border, but still 54% disapproved in that area as well, Joe and Savannah.
All right, Megan, thank you so much.
Well, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City who rose to national prominence on 9/11, is in the hospital this morning. A spokesperson for Giuliani said he is in, quote, critical but stable condition in a Florida hospital. It's unclear why the 81-year-old was hospitalized, but in a live stream of his X show, America's Mayor Live, on Friday, Giuliani could be heard coughing, and he said his voice was, quote, a little under the weather. In a Truth Social post, President Trump called his friend Giuliani, quote, a true warrior and the best mayor in the history of New York City, before going on to advance his false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. Giuliani, who gained the title America's Mayor after guiding New York through the aftermath of 9/11, has faced a slew of legal and financial troubles following the 2020 election. As Trump's former personal attorney, he played a crucial role in trying to cast doubt on the election of President Biden.
The legal fight over abortion is heating up once again. A federal appeals court moved to ban access to the abortion pill mifepristone by mail. It's one of the 2 pills used in medication abortions. The ruling came on Friday when a federal appeals court said the medication would have to be dispensed in person all across the country.
Now, Danco Laboratories, which makes mifepristone, has filed an emergency appeal asking the Supreme Court to overturn that ruling. It also asked the High Court to pause the lower court's ruling while it considers the appeal. This all stems from an FDA rule implemented back in 2023 that permanently allowed abortion pills to be dispensed by mail or telehealth. Last year, Louisiana challenged that rule.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos and NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joined us now to talk more about this. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being here. Danny, let's start with you. This is really the biggest jolt to abortion policy since Roe versus Wade was overturned about 4 years ago. Were you surprised at all by this? What does this decision mean right now?
This could have gone either way, but this is yet another decision that is what we call a stay. It's really about what do we do while these these cases work their way through the courts. And often when a court issues a stay, the other side appeals that. So you have an appeal of a stay and sometimes the stay of the stay, and that's where we are right now. But for now, it means that at least that this drug is not available through telehealth. And that is only a temporary solution until the court can decide the entire case or the entire case is resolved on the merits.
Dr. Azar, let's bring you in here and talk about this drug. What should people know about mifepristone and how difficult it is to obtain in person?
So it's incredibly important. It was first FDA approved in the year 2000 for medication abortion, and it's used in combination, or it's actually indicated in combination with a second medication, misoprostol. And this is important. I want to put a little fine point on this. Misoprostol is still available and can be used for medication abortion, although the combination is typically associated with less cramping as well as less bleeding. These are medications that have been proven to be safe and effective. They are, again, indicated for the use of early abortion, that is up to 10 weeks of gestation. This is a blow. I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. About 2/3 of abortions in this country are achieved with medication as opposed to a surgical procedure. And ever since this ruling in 2023 went into effect that made permanent the allowability of telehealth, for this purpose, about a quarter of the mifepristone is now obtained via telemedicine.
So, Danny, legally, what happens next? And didn't the Supreme Court decide a case about nationwide injunctions like this?
Yes, the most immediate step forward is that the drug companies have already filed to challenge this decision. And their chief argument is essentially that Louisiana doesn't have what we call standing. Standing is a constitutional requirement that you have some interest in the outcome. It's not enough that the three of us may not like a law. We can't just file suit to challenge it unless we have some concrete stake in the outcome. And the argument here is that Louisiana isn't required to do or not do anything. But Louisiana's argument is, look, we have a law of our own that bans this. And so people who come in here and are getting illegal abortions under Louisiana law by drugs that are sent into our state, that gives us standing. And yes, you bring up the point about nationwide injunctions. This is a little different, but I suspect the nationwide injunction controversy is not yet over. We may see this revisited.
Dr. Azar, as a doctor, what concerns you most about the federal appeals court ruling?
So two things, Savannah. One is that this is going to significantly and severely restrict access for people who need it the most. That is women who live in rural areas, sort of what we refer to as medication or provider deserts, where they just don't have access to in-person care in order to have this prescription written for them and to have this medication dispensed. And the other one, I think the bigger picture here, is the fact that this ruling essentially circumvents the FDA's authority here. This is a court making a medical decision. The FDA goes through a very, very rigorous process when they make a proclamation that a medication is safe and effective, and this essentially abolishes that.
All right, Danny and Dr. Azar, thank you both.
Well, this morning, travelers across the country are feeling the impact of the shutdown of budget carrier Spirit Airlines over the weekend. Many passengers were left stranded after Spirit announced in the wee hours of Saturday morning it would cease operations. Other airlines are now stepping in to help people get to their destinations. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has more on the shutdown and why a federal government bailout did not materialize.
Growing fallout after the collapse of Spirit Airlines, with hundreds of thousands of bookings now canceled.
I'm literally sitting here stranded in the Virgin Islands right now.
After the abrupt shutdown, the airline told travelers not to go to the airport, saying card payers will receive a refund, but offering no options for rebooking. Instead, directing people to a website for next steps.
It's been a nightmare. No customer service exists, and Spirit don't exist.
Now other carriers are stepping in.
We're offering $199 fares. They're capped at $199 for most of the markets.
United reports booking 14,000 Spirit passengers, but for many, the damage is already done. Michelle Barrow and her grandchildren have been stuck in South Florida since Saturday.
So my 8-year-old granddaughter is crying. Is she ever going to see her mommy again?
The grandmother from Raleigh resorting to Southwest to get a flight out.
I had to use 2 separate cards to be able to buy these tickets. So it's really put us in a bind.
You lost money
on this trip, which was supposed to be a vacation.
Right.
Despite last-minute efforts to save the budget airline, a deal with the administration didn't come together.
We oftentimes don't have $500 million laying around in a spare account that we can put into a bailout. Spirit was in dire straits long before the war with Iran.
Now travel experts warn losing one of the largest low-cost carriers will drive prices up for everyone.
We saw ticket prices on average roughly 14% lower because Spirit was an option. Unfortunately for travelers trying to find affordability with one less carrier in the market is really going to be tough.
And the impact goes beyond travelers. With roughly 17,000 employees without work, emotional goodbyes are going viral.
So thank you for your support over the years.
Here in Fort Lauderdale, the Spirit ticket counters take up nearly half of Terminal 4, and all day today, it's practically been a ghost town. It is worth noting that other hotspots like Orlando and Las Vegas could see similar impacts just as a busy travel season gets underway. Back to you.
All right, Kathy, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in travel expert, spokesperson for Going.com, Katie Nastro. You just saw her there in Kathy's piece. Katie, good morning. Good to have you with us as always. So let's talk about what we just heard there a little bit more regarding airfares. Many people gravitated towards Spirit Airline because it was an affordable, no-frills airline. Walk us through how that worked for them while they were in operation as a business model, especially now that a lot of these major carriers offer budget options or, like you can pay even cheaper if you're not checking a bag or you don't get to pick your seat, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, essentially, Savannah, the Spirit model, or really any ultra low-cost model out there, is what they would refer to as home of the bare fare. So basically, they are setting their base fares super low, and then they make most of their sort of revenue from all of the extras that you can add on. They really were one of the pioneers of the unbundling phenomena that we started to see legacy carriers adopt, and we're starting to see adopt in premium classes nowadays, which is pretty incredible that they've had such a longevity for this type of operation. And so, with the Spirit model, however, it is a volume play. If you don't have enough planes flying and people aren't buying additional extras, they really needed to keep a certain amount going to be able to generate revenue. And coming out of the pandemic, tastes had changed. They had operational issues internally. They had issues with a certain provider of engines. It was a compound interest, as well as the failed merger with JetBlue. It really was a recipe for distress, and unfortunately, Spirit sort of could not keep the lights on.
Clearly this weekend, a lot of people were caught off guard by the announcement. Whether you had a flight booked directly through the airline or it was some sort of third-party travel site, what should travelers know about trying to get refunds and trying to get booked on other airlines?
Yeah, Joe, I think the biggest silver lining to this dark cloud that Spirit has now left over the traveling public is really that when a liquidation happens in the airline industry, sometimes travelers are left at the very end of the line in terms of repayments. However, Spirit has publicly stated that they will provide refunds, and we've already seen some of these being issued. It just might take a little bit of time because there were thousands of people impacted. As well as if you had paid through, say, an OTA, you need to contact that OTA directly, especially if your Spirit flight was a part of a vacation package, for example. They're going to be the ones that are going to be requesting that refund on your behalf instead of going directly to Spirit.
Katie, what about something like loyalty points for Spirit Airlines passengers? Are they worthless? What happens to them?
Savannah, I wish I had better news on that front. Unfortunately, for any of the travelers out there that had used some of Spirit's loyalty or a voucher credit, for example, you're unfortunately at the mercy of the bankruptcy court. You have to file a claim there, and it may take months to see, if anything, back. They're the ones that are going to understand and prescribe what type of value that these flights were worth at their point value, which at this point, I would consider a write-off.
Is Spirit the canary in the coal mine? Are other airlines at risk of suffering a similar fate, or is just Spirit drastically different from the other airlines and it's hard to compare them?
Yeah, they were really on the back foot coming out of the pandemic, and it just sort of always in last place when it came to a revenue standpoint. You know, there are other smaller carriers in the U.S. that aren't doing the best financially, but I don't want to compare apples to apples here and strike fear that another airline in the U.S. is going to go bust and cease to exist. But, you know, if jet fuel prices stay high, operational costs stay high, we unfortunately could be in for more turbulent times, and we are in for more turbulent times across any airline, not just small carriers and legacy carriers.
All right, Katie Nastro, great to have you as always. Thanks so much.
We are looking at a soggy start to the week for some parts of the country.
NBC meteorologist Andrea Romero joins us with our forecast. Hi, Andrea. Good morning.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. And yeah, it's going to be a growing threat of severe weather that we're going to be tracking for the beginning of this week. This morning, we are looking at some storms that are setting up here over southern Indiana into eastern parts of Kentucky. This is all part of this expansive system that will be stretching basically through the Great Lakes and into the southwest. Today, a few storms will be impacting the Midwest. That's where most of the area will be getting that precipitation. And then we also have some rain and some mountain snow that could be developing into the Rockies. This storm system will continue to move towards the east, and we're looking at the possibility, of course, of seeing those strong to severe storms develop over the south, and the rain will even extend into the northeast into Wednesday. We're expecting some of those severe storms also from Texas all the way into Alabama. Of course, this is beneficial rain that will be arriving in the lower Mississippi into the southeast, but we do have that severe threat that will be impacting parts of the country. So today, the threat will be mostly, we'll be dealing with damaging hail anywhere from Oklahoma all the way up into the Ohio River Valley, and that threat will intensify and continue to move southward, and that threat will be present tomorrow for parts of Texas, into parts of Kentucky, even Tennessee, and of course into the Gulf Coast states by Wednesday. And then while we're tracking severe weather in that part of the country, we have snow that we're talking about in parts of Colorado and parts of Wyoming. We even have winter storm warnings that are set up starting tonight into Wednesday. We're looking at feet of snow that can be accumulating in the mountain areas west of Denver. In Denver, we can even see some accumulation in the city. Wow. So we're talking about maybe 3 to 9 inches that could set up in parts of Denver with that snowfall. And of course, this is all part of that temperature roller coaster that we've been seeing across the country. We had that cold weekend here in the city in the northeast. Now we're expecting a brief warm up. Tomorrow we're going to be in the 80s. And then we have this next round of Arctic air that's just going to be coming behind that front.
Great.
So at the end of the week, the temperatures will be dropping along the northeast with that Canadian air that's just going to be reloading over the area into the East Coast. So we're looking at temperatures maybe in the 50s in Boston by the weekend.
As long as we don't get snow.
Yeah,
Colorado.
Exactly. We can deal with the cold air, but not the snow.
Colorado's used to that. Wild May.
Yes.
Not here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.